Let me now go over in more detail this technique of using tweening animations in Director. Creating and manipulating tween animations are one of the most important techniques, animation techniques, to learn in Director. To use tweening in Director, you define properties for a sprite in frames called keyframes, and then let Director change the properties in the frames in between these two. So tweening animations always involved 2 keyframes, 2 and only 2 keyframes. This is the same with all other or most other animation programs, including Flash. To specify the tweening properties for a sprite, you'll use the Sprite Tweening dialog box. You'll want to select a sprite on the stage and then choose Modify, Sprite Tweening. So the tweening technique has its own dialog here. It's quite a detailed dialog, lots of options here. At the top you have the different kinds of sprite properties you can tween: path, size, rotation, skew, color, and blend. You have a curvature feature, a speed, and then something called ease in and ease out, which I'll cover in a later tutorial. Let's go over each of these properties first. Let me demonstrate how these tweens look: tweening path, size, rotation, skew, and the foreground, background, color, and blend. Let's start with path. And we'll start by creating our second keyframe. Keyframes are denoted here in the timeline with open circles. So I'm going to go to frame 30 and insert a new keyframe, because you always need exactly two keyframes to set up your animation tweens in Director. So let's now tween the path of this sprite. Notice it's moving across the stage. You can also take the size of the sprite, and now I'm tweening both the path and the size. Let's go ahead and make this a little bit more obvious there. In fact, let's go ahead and change the size to almost nothing so you can see that it's shrinking. And now the problem here is if I select the entire sprite span, I'm changing the size of both keyframes. Instead, I want to select just one keyframe, and now I have my animation tweening the size. That'll be a very important technique, is to remember to change one of the keyframes at a time. Let's go ahead and hide this channel and create another sprite here. Let's change the color and let's do an oval. And now let's tween the skew of this oval by again inserting a keyframe out here at frame 30. And I'm going to flatten that down like so, and notice that it will animate that change for me by creating the in-between frames between the two keyframes. Let's now do both a skew and a rotate. To do that, I'm going to need actually a bitmap cast member. Let's create another channel here, and let's drag out a bitmap image and add my keyframe. And taking the rotate and skew tool, let's first skew this like so, and again Director will create the in-between states for me. Let's now also rotate it by moving my cursor to a different location on the sprite and dragging my mouse, and now Director automatically sets up the tween for me, both skewing and rotating this sprite. Next, let me demonstrate how to tween colors by changing the foreground color of my black tetrahedron there to bright red. And notice that because I've set up that option in my Sprite Tween dialog box, remember under Modify, Sprite, Tweening, I've set up background color and foreground color tweening, as well as skew, rotation, size, and path. The blend is also interesting. This is a very common technique and one that you'll use all the time, is I can also change my blend setting here in the Properties Inspector so that essentially this sprite is transparent, and now Director fades it in for me. You'll typically use this with titles and other sprites that you want to fade in and fade out. Pictures is a good example of using the blend to fade in and out pictures in a slideshow. I can go either direction. Let's go back and bring up one of these other sprites here. And let's fade this one out by taking the blend here and bringing that to 0. So not only is it shrinking and moving across the stage, but it's also fading out. So you can see that there is an in-between frame that Director has set up for me on its way to becoming completely transparent there. So very effective animation technique, easy to set up and easy to modify and manipulate. Now you may have noticed that when I did my first animation that you saw this path right here. You can actually use these paths to refine your animations. Notice that I'm refining the location of that path movement. So let me now move on to the next movie and demonstrate how to use this path overlay to fine-tune your tween animations in Director.